Huh? It's 5:05 and welcome into a Monday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. We are T-minus 1 day until Decision Day 2024, and more than 4.2 million, to be exact, 4,200,134 North Carolinians have cast their ballots during this incredibly record-breaking busy in-person early voting period, which ended Saturday afternoon across the state. The 2024 numbers easily topped the previous early voting record of more than 3.6 million ballots. That was cast back in 2020. And as of Sunday morning, 4.46 million voters, including absentee voting, that includes overseas mail ballots as well, had been cast in the general election here in North Carolina. In total, that's 56.7% of the state's 7.8 million registered voters. Voters in the 25 western North Carolina counties that were so heavily impacted by Hurricane Helene some 6 weeks ago continue to outpace the rest of the state in voter turnout. Through Saturday, turnout in those 25 counties was about 59%, which is about 2% higher than that statewide average. Karen Brinson Bell, who is the executive director of the North Carolina State Board of Elections, said that they anticipate more than 1 million voters will vote at more than 2,600 polling locations across the state. Polls do open tomorrow morning, and we'll be diving into all of this tomorrow, everything you need to know. Polls are open from 6:30 a.m. until 7:30 p.m. on Election Day. In Western North Carolina, almost all Election Day voting locations that were planned to be open before Hurricane Helene will still be operational, so that's good news there. For some areas where there is some issues with those facilities, maybe it's power, water, whatever, there will be secure tents that will be set up for a handful of those precincts that will be set up at 7 locations, 4 in Yancey County, and there will be 1 in Buncombe, Burke, and Haywood counties, allowing and making sure everybody has what they need to get out and vote on Election Day tomorrow, where, again, 2,600 voting locations will be open across the state. With that, a total of 7 people remain unaccounted for in the western half of North Carolina following Helene, as the death toll from the storm remains at 101 as of Sunday. Fatalities reported across 22 counties in North Carolina, the vast majority of those being reported in Buncombe County, where 43 people unfortunately lost their lives, 10 in Yancey and 9 in Henderson. We'll continue to track those 7 unaccounted for individuals right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:08 on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. Tomorrow is the day, Election Day 2024. It is finally here. Donna King, editor-in-chief over at Carolina Journal, joins me this morning on the News Hour. Donna, it has been an unbelievable last couple of months. Election Day finally here tomorrow. What are we anticipating throughout the rest of the day today and as we get into the day tomorrow, Election Day?
Sure. The week is finally here. I've been looking for it for 4 years, 2 years, a minimum, certainly the last few weeks. I think we're going to see what I'm really going to be looking for truly is there going to be a bump in that Election Day turnout? Because what we've seen over the last, say, 2 weeks or so in early voting, just unprecedented historic levels of early voting. On Friday, North Carolina passed the record, just shattered the record for early voting by the end of Friday by about 150,000 early votes.
Wow.
So, it really is a tremendous, tremendous turnout. And that says a lot for both parties. That is always a good thing. It shows that democracy is alive and well here in North Carolina. So, I think what I'm looking to see for tomorrow, for Election Day, to see how much turnout we're really going to see, because did that cannibalize some of the vote Election Day turnout, particularly for Republicans, because Republicans tend to show up on Election Day. It's just a philosophical difference. The parties worked really hard to get people to turn out early. It seemed to have worked. Republicans outpaced Democrats throughout the early voting period. And there was a time where we thought, okay, Republicans are really turning out, but we're not going to hit the 2020 numbers that we did. We did. I mean, past it. So I think as of Friday, certainly Saturday saw a lot of early voting turnout. Now the question is who's coming out on Tuesday.
Well, and that this term cannibalizing election day has been used a lot over the last couple of weeks as we've watched this unfold. Now, there's a lot of folks that seem to think that, yes, even though Republicans did vote at a higher rate during early voting, that they could still have double-digit percentage-wise turnout advantages over Democrats, which does really beg the question, are we looking at an election that maybe is not as close as some of the polling has shown here in North Carolina if Republican turnout is as sky high as it could potentially be?
I think that's very likely because all along in 16 and 20 and now in 2024, we saw what a lot of pollsters had called the shy Trump voter. Now, a lot of them have learned to calibrate their polls to accommodate it. What that basically means is, particularly among men, Trump supporters tend not to answer polls. And a lot of pollsters have said, look, we've got it figured out. We've got the calculus. We can accommodate and know what the polls really are, even if they don't answer us. We don't know. I don't know for sure that that is true. We'll see. And I think that's the big question going into tomorrow. But really, the Republican turnout early, that could really, those numbers are certainly high for early turnout. We'll see if that means a higher turnout at the end of Election Day. But a lot of the reason for the difference in early turnout is that Democrats just were not coming out during early voting. At one point, they were about 350,000 votes down in early voting. Now, will they turn out tomorrow? Will they show up on Election Day instead and switch that trend that we've seen in recent years? Maybe, maybe not. I know that the Democrats are really, really pounding the pavement trying to get them to turn out.
Donna King, the editor-in-chief over at the Carolina Journal, joins us this morning as we discuss tomorrow, Election Day. Donna, the youth vote has been something that's been interesting to track this election cycle. Younger folks busy with life, college, getting married, starting a family. Sure. Politics ain't always the top of the mind, and we've seen some decreased turnout in certain groups and increased turnout in other groups. I think that's going to be a thread to follow, not just in North Carolina, but national with young voters, specifically those young Republicans.
Absolutely. And I'm really encouraged to see more and more young people turning out. Now, certainly they don't turn out at the level that the older generations, those early voters tended to be over 50 years old in the largest group. But really, we're seeing higher turnout again among young Republicans versus young Democrats. But Democrats are down, were down in early voting about 40,000 votes over 2020. Republican voters are up. I think what we're also seeing is real frustration with the cost of living, not being able to house. They want that optimism, that golden era that I think I grew up with. Certainly, a lot of positive thinking about the future, and I think that's what they're missing, and that's what they're looking for. And if you've been to some of these Trump rallies, there is a sense of we are the future and we want something different. But we're also seeing that in the Harris camp. So I think that they worked really hard. Harris worked really hard to create a positive outlook, particularly among younger voters, but they're just not turning out. And it may be, we saw that in the primary, in the Democrat primary, turnout was very low at the time, and when the candidate was Joe Biden. So it may have been, if they didn't buy in the primary vote in March for Joe Biden, it was hard to get them on board for Kamala Harris.
Tomorrow is set to be a busy day over at carolinajournal.com. Donna, we're running election coverage tomorrow night. What are the details on that?
Absolutely. We're going to be live on YouTube from 7 p.m. until 11 p.m. Now, it may be an early night. I don't know. But with all of these numbers being so close, Harris and Trump being tied around 47% in our last poll, it may end up being a late night. But we're going to be really watching all of those Council of State and the balance of power in the state legislature. So make sure you tune in and join us.
Donna King from the Carolina Journal joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's 5:14, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time to get a look at traffic on this Monday morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thanks, Nick. Alex Coakley, this morning at 10. WBT.
Your emergency situation station.
521. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. We are also streaming live this morning on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel. You can check out our podcast and take that on the go with you as well in your favorite podcast app. Just search for the Carolina Journal News Hour or visit WBT.com and click on the podcast tab. Well, in the last couple of days, we have gotten some more insights into key races across the state in terms of finances. The third quarter campaign finance reports in North Carolina highlight significant fundraising leads for Democrats in many key races. Democrat Attorney General Josh Stein's campaign for governor has raised over $77.5 million, far outpacing Republican Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson at $19.8 million. Stein also leads Robinson in the polls, holding some double-digit advantages in most polls at 43.5% compared to Robinson, sub 30% in many polls. The Democrat Leadership Committee has bolstered Stein's campaign, giving him more than $29 million, while also supporting other Democratic candidates. In the lieutenant governor's race, Democrat Senator Rachel Hunt has raised $3.4 million, surpassing Republican Hal Weatherman's $1.6. For Attorney General, Congressman Jeff Jackson, the Democrat there, raising about $15.5 million, nearly doubling that of the money raised by Republican Congressman Dan Bishop. He raised just shy of $9 million. Democrats maintain a financial edge in other statewide races as well. Natasha Marcus, running for Commissioner of Insurance, has out-fundraised Republican incumbent Mike Causey, while Democrat candidate Mo Green has raised substantially more than his Republican opponent in Michelle Morrow, that in the race for Superintendent of Public Instruction, which, by the way, that's a key race to keep an eye out for tomorrow. Polling has that race razor thin. The Democrats' financial advantage is attributed to a significant amount of contributions from what is known as party committees, especially the North Carolina Democratic Leadership Committee, which is not subject to the normal contribution limits that regular individuals and groups are. Jim Sterling of the John Locke Foundation notes that these unrestricted funds give Democrats a substantial advantage, potentially prompting Republicans to push for legal changes to balance those fundraising dynamics in the years to come. You can read more on that story by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com. We've got all of the details for these various statewide races on our website this morning. Well, as you head to the polls tomorrow morning, they open at 6:30. You are not supposed to take a picture with your ballot. That is a crime in North Carolina. However, an individual, a voter that has been under a legal challenge with the state of North Carolina, did post another ballot selfie this week. A libertarian voter who is currently challenging North Carolina's ban on ballot selfies posted a photo of her with her general election ballot late last week, and she will not face any sort of prosecution for that action, thanks to a court order which was issued back on October the 21st. The voter, whose name is Susan Hogarth, posted on X, quote, "I voted Saturday and it was a privilege to have Libertarian presidential candidate Chase Oliver waiting for me outside the polls, so I got another ballot selfie with him." She posted that out on X over the last week. She said North Carolina's ballot selfie ban is still in place. Hope this is the last year for the scary signage in the polling locations. U.S. District Judge Louis Wood Flanagan issued an order last week directing Wake County District Attorney Lauren Freeman not to prosecute Susan Hogarth. The order arrived 3 days after Hogarth and Freeman informed the judge that they could not reach a deal in the case. Flanagan's order addressed part of the request, saying, quote, "The court resolved the plaintiff's motion for injunctive relief in the reliance upon the defendant Freeman's declaration of exercise of prosecutorial discretion. Pending the court's determination on the challenge of the statutory provision, Freeman shall not engage in any prosecution of the plaintiff under the North Carolina general statute for photographing, videotaping, or otherwise recording an image of the plaintiff's own voted official ballot in the voting enclosure, provided said photograph, video, or recording does not include the image of any other person or any other voted ballot. Number 2, any prosecution of the plaintiff under the general statute allowing her own ballot to be seen by any other person. Or number 3, any prosecution of the plaintiff under general statute for disclosing her own voted ballot. A status report filed back on October the 18th in the case indicated that the two individuals here, the voter in Susan Hogarth and the district attorney in Wake County, Freeman, had not been able to reach an agreement on details of the consent decree in this case. The order also indicated that the State Board of Elections would not take part in any deal between the two as that continues to go on. Defendants in the case filed motions on the same day to dismiss the suit, and October the 7th hearing before Judge Flanagan had promoted the discussion of a consent decree between these two individuals. However, after apparently hours of back and forth, and there was a little bit of headway at the end of the day, there was no final resolution in this case. The State Board of Elections reports, and it is current general statute in North Carolina, that taking a picture with your ballot is illegal, and that's the case in 14 states, including North Carolina. The state ban includes taking a photo with a ballot at an election site, as well as an absentee ballot at home. Breaking the state law could lead to misdemeanor charges under North Carolina General Statute. That's 163-166.3. Hogarth voted for a Libertarian Party primary candidate Chase Oliver in March. She shared that photo on X at the time, which is how this lawsuit came to fruition. 1 in 10 American adults, roughly 26 million of them, have taken a ballot selfie at some point in their lives, according to studies that have been done. The lawsuit asks the court to declare ballot selfies are protected expression under the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. According to the State Board of Elections website, voters are allowed to have phones or electronic devices with them while voting, as long as those devices are not used to take any photos or videos. So while for this one individual voter in Susan Hogarth, would highly recommend against you taking a picture with your ballot unless state law is to change, which there is likely some appetite to do that in the coming years here across the state of North Carolina. Pretty interesting story. We'll continue to follow the legal saga over at CarolinaJournal.com. It's now 5:29 on the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time to get another look at the roadways this morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. Have a nice Hot.
It's 5:35. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good Monday morning to you. State and national Republican groups have asked the North Carolina Supreme Court to intervene in a case known as Kevitt versus State Board of Elections, which is a lawsuit challenging the state board's policy for overseas voters. This request follows a decision against the Republican groups by a trial judge and the appeals court. The GOP groups argue that the state election officials are allowing overseas voters who have never have resided or residency in North Carolina to register and vote, violating the state constitution. They are seeking an emergency order to prevent these votes from being counted, proposing that they be treated as provisional ballots until voter eligibility is verified. A decision is sought before Election Day to prevent potential ineligible votes from affecting the election outcome, including that of the likely tight presidential race. The case centers on the interpretation of a 2011 law designed to include overseas voters, which the Republicans argue is being misapplied to allow non-citizens and non-residents of the state to vote. Although the trial judge acknowledged a narrow statutory exemption, he found no evidence of fraudulent use or unlawful registration under this current provision, stating that the election boards had not knowingly permitted ineligible registrations and votes to take place. The court highlighted bipartisan support for the law's initial passage and the absence of any prior challenge to its application. So these groups are now asking our state's highest court in the North Carolina Supreme Court to intervene on this case. They want a decision before Election Day. That is not going to happen. However, we'll continue to follow the saga after the election right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour and on our website, carolinajournal.com. It's now 5:37 on the Carolina Journal News Hour. A record-breaking early voting period is over in North Carolina. To get details on that, it's my pleasure to welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour this morning, Andy Jackson from the John Locke Foundation. Andy, we have talked at this point probably half a dozen times or so about early voting. It's said and done. Saturday was the last day. What do you make of all of the numbers that we've seen in the 17 days prior of early voting?
Well, the top line thing is that we did have a record early voting, but we did not actually meet our standard set 4 years ago in 2020 about the number of votes before Election Day. We're actually 123,000 short of that goal. So the big question there is, are we looking at a relatively low turnout election, or are we looking at a whole bunch of people that are moving back to Election Day? Obviously, we're not going to know the final answer to that until Tuesday evening. I kind of suspect we're going to meet the same turnout totals that we had in 2020, which is especially surprising considering that we have several 100,000 more voters in North Carolina.
Well, and I think that's an interesting kind of trail to go down. Andy, I would find it hard to believe that there's not a lot of enthusiasm this election cycle. You can't really escape the political cycle if you say I'm not political, I don't follow politics. It's been beaten into your head, but as you noted with those numbers, that's what it's showing thus far. You think this is maybe an enthusiasm thing more than anything else?
It could be. I mean, part of it is, people might be tired. This is the third time in a row that Trump's been on the ballot. Nobody voted for Kamala Harris to be the Democratic nominee. Certainly, there are pockets of very, very strong enthusiasm on both sides. It's one of those interesting things. I don't know how much of this is super genuine enthusiasm on both sides, or one of those things like at the end of the boxing match and both fighters raise their hands in victory saying, hey, I feel like I won. But there are reasons for both sides to be confident. Different polls that you've looked at, different turnout numbers that you've looked at. And so I think neither side is really feeling defeatist. I'll put it that way. But yeah, there might be for like regular voters that are in between the middle, in the middle here, they might think, well, we've seen this song and dance before, and maybe it's not quite great the third time around.
So as we dive and dig into some of these early voting numbers, Republicans at the end of the early voting period still up over Democrats. Andy, that from everything I've looked at, that hasn't happened in modern history in North Carolina. That's something that's pretty unusual.
It's very unusual. Traditionally, Republicans have been, I'm going to wait till election day. Now, they've been slowly coming along and getting on to the early voting, but early voting has always been something that the Democrats have dominated. Mail voting last time around. Actually, I will take this a step back. Actually, Republicans or Trump actually won the early vote, the early in-person vote in 2020 because so many Democrats went to mail. So maybe from that experience and also from a concerted effort by the Republican Party and their allies to try to get people to so-called bank their vote has encouraged Republicans to come out early. But the difference wasn't that great. It's only 30,000 more Republicans have voted before Election Day than 4 years ago. So it's an improvement. And certainly it's an improvement over what the Democrats have. They're about 270,000 fewer Democrats have voted before Election Day compared to 4 years ago. Unaffiliated's up a little over 100,000. So these are numbers that, once again, we're missing a big piece of the puzzle. That's Election Day. But going on these numbers, certainly you would rather be in the Republican Party than the Democratic Party right now.
So let's, I guess, forecast a little bit as to what we could expect potentially tomorrow. There's been this, I guess, fear maybe, and maybe that's not the right word to use, but I'll call it fear that Republicans were going to cannibalize their typical large margins that they kind of rack up the numbers on with Election Day. From the data that you've dug into, Andy, does it seem like that is going to be the case, or what are you expecting in terms of R versus D turnout on Election Day?
Right. And I will say this is actually not data that I run normally myself. So when you don't have it, you steal it. And I've taken this data from Professor Michael Bitzer from Catawba College, and he's actually has a different data set that he runs, and that includes cannibalization rates, like how many people that had voted on Election Day, for example, 4 years ago, voted early today. And there is a big gap. Republicans, it's about 10% cannibalization rate. So it's not like all the Republicans, but 10% is a significant amount. That's over 100,000 votes that have moved from Election Day to earlier on, either mail or early voting. Democrats, that's down to 4%, and they're only cannibalized a little under 60,000 votes. So you're looking at, and I take that back, Republicans are closer to 150, not 100,000. So between those two, you're looking at kind of a net loss for Republicans of about 90,000 votes compared to what they had in election days in the past. And so that's going to take the expected Republican Election Day advantage down from around 270,000 on Election Day, which is kind of what they've had in the past, down to maybe 180,000. Now, if the final number is anywhere near that, and you combine that with the early and absentee ballots, you're still looking like you're in good shape if you're on the Republican side. So that's maybe a little bit of comfort to Democrats that Republicans have cannibalized more, but it's not nearly enough to make up for the drop in Democratic votes in early and mail voting.
If folks want to dig into some more of these early voting numbers that we're talking about here this morning, where do they go to do that?
The way that I recommend to do that is just go to carolinaelections.com. And when you click on that, you'll see two options. The right is for our voter registration page. You want to click on the left, which is our vote tracker, and that'll bring up the latest numbers. We update that with data from the State Board of Elections every morning. I get my coffee usually around 8:30. That is up.
Andy Jackson from the John Locke Foundation joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:44, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. A final look at traffic this morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. Have a Noon at 3.
News Talk 1110 and 99.3.
WBT.
Huh? It's 5:52. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Good Monday morning to you. Well, the home stretch is here. Election Day tomorrow. Polls do open in about 24 hours. 6:30 tomorrow morning is when polls open at over 2,600 voting locations across the state of North Carolina. And boy, the last couple days have been packed in terms of candidate visits. Everybody has been here, both presidential candidates, both vice presidential candidates, the VP and Kamala Harris in Charlotte over the weekend, Trump in Kinston last night. He'll be in Raleigh this morning. J.D. Vance and Trump Jr. also in Raleigh yesterday, as really the path to victory as we are seeing it, at least in terms of rally stops, and the emphasis for the Trump campaign looks like North Carolina and Pennsylvania. Those are the two states that they are trying to lock down to get to those 270 electoral votes that each of the candidates, of course, would need to hit that electoral victory. With early voting wrapped up in North Carolina, more than 4.2 million North Carolinians casted their ballot during this in-person early voting period, which ended on Saturday afternoon. The 2024 numbers easily topped those of the previous early voting numbers. There was a record of more than 3.6 million early votes cast in 2020, and as of Sunday morning, 4,465,548 voters, including absentee overseas ballots, had been cast here in North Carolina. In total, that's about 56.7% of the state's 7.8 million registered voters voting in those 25 western North Carolina counties that were so heavily affected by the impacts of Hurricane Helene. They continue to outpace the rest of the state in terms of voter turnout. Through Saturday, turnout in those 25 counties was almost 59%. That's about 2% higher than the total statewide turnout. Karen Brinson Bell, who is the executive director for the North Carolina State Board of Elections, said that they anticipate more than 1 million votes, more than 1 million voters, will vote at more than 2,600 voting locations across the state from 6:30 tomorrow morning until 7:30 p.m. tomorrow night. That's when polls do close. In western North Carolina, almost all Election Day voting sites that were originally planned for before Hurricane Helene impacted that area will still be operational. However, in a few areas where those traditional plans are not able to come to fruition due to whether the building is destroyed or there's no power, there will be secure tents for a handful of precincts where there is no physical structure available to host voting due to storm damage. The alternative voting sites are now set up at just 7 locations across the state, 4 in Yancey County and 1 in Buncombe, Burke, and Haywood counties. So fortunately, as much damage and destruction took place out in western North Carolina, they have got as many of those voting locations, and they will have those online and operational starting at 6:30 tomorrow morning. With continuing to track news out of western North Carolina, a total of 7 people remain unaccounted for in that area of the state following Hurricane Helene, as the death toll from that storm does remain at 101 as of this morning. Fatalities have been reported, unfortunately, across 22 counties, according to the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. The vast majority of those fatalities being reported in Buncombe County, where 43 people lost their lives, Yancey County 10, and Henderson County 9. Those 7 individuals still unaccounted for, and the search operations continue for those individuals as of today. So tomorrow is the day. Everything you need to know about Election Day voting, we'll have that for you coming up. Again, 2,600 polling places, 13 hours of early voting, 6:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. Polls will close at 7:30. We will get the early vote total. That'll be flowing in sometime probably close to 8 o'clock. Could be 7:45, could be 8:15 or so. And then from then on out, we'll start getting those individual polling locations or those individual precincts that will start reporting all of their Election Day vote totals. Republican turnout, that's going to be the big thread to watch here across the state of North Carolina. We'll be tracking that, and we'll have everything that you need to know about Election Day. Do you need an ID, lines, everything coming up for you on a Tuesday edition, an Election Day edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. I'm filling in once again this morning for Vince Coakley, 10 to noon right here on WBT. Hopefully you can join me for that. If not, we are back tomorrow morning at 5 right here on WBT. News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. Have a great day.